It is great to see everyone here. And I want to just briefly, before I have to run back to CERT, unfortunately, but welcome you all. And, um, excited to see that we're doing this sort of before the end of the term, even though we all know we've got a couple of weeks to go. But I keep having that Barry Manilow song going in my mind. Looks like we made it, but I don't want to jinx anything, so I'm not going to sing any more of that, which I know is disappointing to you all. Look, this has been quite a year, right? We're starting to call it the year like no other. It's been challenging in ways that I don't think any of us could have imagined, and we've also learned things about each other, from our students. About our students that we would never have learned before. And we've come through it with lots of creativity and innovation and collaboration and partnership and a lot of respect for one another and just kind of goodwill and good work. And I just want to, one of the many times I will do this over the coming weeks, thank everyone for getting us this far. It's going to be May on Saturday. Can you believe it? Wow. I'm thinking back to a year ago and just imagining trying to get our heads around like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And you know what? We did it, and we did it in a very WPI way, and we did it together. And so I'm incredibly grateful and incredibly proud. So much of the credit for success, and by the way, I get stopped all the time and people thanking me, and I always say it's a team effort, and the real leaders on that team have been all of you, our faculty especially, and our staff who are supporting you, especially our ATC staff and our phys ed staff, our ROTC staff, everyone who's supporting students and faculty in getting their work done this year. You're the heroes of this story, and we could not have done this without you. And so I'm so pleased that our provost has each term kind of forced us to take a little time and celebrate the innovations that have come forth, the people who put their hearts and souls into advancing WPI students and their educational goals in this most trying year. So I'm so incredibly proud. And I think today you're going to hear some really cool things, new ways of teaching physical education. We are one of the few universities that still has a serious PE requirement, which I love. And I know that whole history is tied to the history of the WPI plan. Well, imagine trying to teach that in COVID, and our coaches and teachers have done amazing work, faculty with teaching phys ed. Our work in the innovation studio with building our maker culture, even during COVID, has been incredible. New approaches to IQPs, super inspiring stories. I can't wait till next year's President's IQP Awards to see the exciting things that come forward. And I'm sure they'll all have amazing stories to tell about overcoming obstacles and still doing amazing projects. In our military science programs, our ROTC programs, I'm so thrilled that we're going to be able to have an in-person commissioning ceremony and to send these young people off to their service in ways that really honor the commitment and work that they've had, and also our faculty in our military science programs. There's great things going on across each and every school. And so you're going to hear about those today. And then I think you're going to hear the perspective of a long-serving WPI faculty member, Beth Eddy, who, as anybody who attended the Cornell West lecture a few weeks ago, learned a little more about Beth and her really long and interesting connections to deep thinking on so many subjects, especially around religion and philosophy. So Beth, thank you for all that you've done for WPI. And I was just joking with her about not signing her paperwork, but I will, I promise. Not that I actually have to sign anything, but just the gift that you've all given us of your time and your mind share and your energy and time away from families this past year has been extraordinary, and we've made it together. So thank you for all you've done, and congratulations on a successful D term. And now I have to go back to CERT because we are planning for fall, when we're all going to be back together. So thank you, Wally, for organizing this. And I want to hand it off as we get started to Donna Harmon, our Director of Physical Education, Recreation, and Athletics, who has had one of the biggest challenges this year and has faced it with great grace. So thanks, Donna.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate that. Very nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Appreciate this opportunity to kind of let people know how it's worked in the world of physical education, one of the degree requirements for all of our students to have and complete. And looking forward to sharing with you briefly here kind of how we had to adapt in a COVID world. So next slide, please. So before March 2020, the magic moment in time is all of our courses were in person. Students were able to take the same courses over and over again because we wanted them to be actively participating. Our goal is really physical education and helping them to move in the world, but also while they're doing physical work, the ability to work with others and learn different strengths and weaknesses within their own confidence, their self-worth, et cetera. And we believe that physical education really helps our students be better in everything they do with their mind, and to help them have healthier lifestyles moving forward. So we were challenging students to take different classes, to learn a new sport, or be involved in a club, as well as our varsity athletics program, which was a higher level active involvement and really pushing and learning more about themselves in different ways. And all of a sudden, March 2020 hit, and we couldn't do anything in person. And so we had, with COVID, we had to learn a whole new way of teaching. We did not do much. Actually, we didn't do very much at all online. And we had to flip everything online. And kind of the mottos that we've had in our department is start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. So as a group, all got together and figured out how to put everything online to make our classes more knowledge-based. And as you also see, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, go together. If we hadn't come together as a department to do this, it really would not have been achievable. It would have been very difficult. And I'm very, very proud of my group of instructors who took their work very seriously in making sure that we had a quality experience still online versus the one that we provide in person. And so just some opportunities that this provided us was by putting things online. Let's take, for example, a football class. Yes, we taught them about different plays involved with football, and we taught them the history of it. But what this also allowed us to was to delve deeper into DEI work around the sport of football, and to not only talk about those individuals that have helped propel the sport forward, but also to bring it to current day. And if anybody isn't aware, the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers had the first staff that was people of color, and they also had many women involved in coaching on their staff. Normally, we probably wouldn't have brought that into our class in order to help people understand not only the sport of football, but how it impacts and how it is inclusive and becoming more inclusive moving forward. And so this was really a great development for us that now we will be able to carry over into our into the new year when we get back with working with students. Isn't just about playing the sport of football and learning how to play it, but also learning about all the key people and developments in DEI that we previously weren't able to and didn't do with our courses. Next slide. Oh, yes. So with this next slide is kind of just how we had to do all of our classes when we came back in D term. Our varsity athletic programs were allowed throughout the year to work out with their coaches. But in D term, everybody got to come back. Our PE classes all became in person, and we developed our protocols, worked with CERT, worked with health services to get it all approved. And it just changed everything that we did. But know that our students want to be active, want to do activities, and we figured out a good way this D term to get everybody involved, back together, working out together, and developing that healthy lifestyle that COVID didn't give us that opportunity in many situations. And just the relief that everybody had and personally coming together in a class can't be underestimated. And we were thrilled to be able to provide that opportunity to have a group, socially distanced with masks, to come together and do something as a group. So I'm really proud again of my department for working together and figuring this all out with all of our partners around campus in order to get back to the work that we love doing, which is working with students in person. So that's my presentation. I'd like to turn this over to Stephen McCauley, who's going to talk about the Melbourne Project Center.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you all for the opportunity. Good to be with you all at this event. Well, first I want to start by saying that I'm actually based in Melbourne at the moment. I've been sort of ensconced here throughout the pandemic, and I want to start by acknowledging the original custodians of the land here in Melbourne, the Boonwurrung peoples and the Wurundjeri peoples. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about how we've managed to deliver IQPs that are connected with partners here at the Melbourne Project Center in spite of this distance learning context that we've been in. Next, please. So we have been busy during the pandemic. We have actually offered 4 terms worth of IQP cohorts of IQP projects during the pandemic since last D term of 2020. And of course, it's been a huge disappointment for the students, and I'm really heartbroken for them not being able to travel here. They've done amazingly, of course. As you all know, they've been incredibly resilient, and I think they're really enjoying the project experiences now and connecting with a team and working on something that really contributes to an organization here in Melbourne during this time. Next, please. One thing that our teams have been able to do is to contribute really meaningful to projects using transmedia storytelling strategies and the vast amounts of data and media that are out there to really collapse the distance and bring the projects into those spaces. So in the upper right, there's an interactive database of partners who are involved in an environmental governance project around the Port Phillip Bay. In the upper left is a assertion video that a team made to promote a campaign about introducing a new subway line in Melbourne. In the bottom left is an interactive map a team made for the Collingwood Children's Farm when their activities had to go online to be able to connect with families that way. And in the bottom right is an animation that a team made as part of a set of educational animations about ecology in the Melbourne region. And this team worked with the Multicultural Youth Alliance to prepare videos that were appropriate to the diverse communities of Melbourne and ultimately translated the animations into 6 different languages. Next, please. Of course, one of the main goals of the IQP is for students to understand the really complex social context in which design and engineering interventions take place. And we wondered if this was really going to be possible. And it turns out that students were able to engage sometimes really deeply with stakeholder communities. And this team actually was able to interview 39 different people here in Australia as part of a project with the Emergency Services Foundation to explore the transition to retirement of people in the emergency services. And here the team is interviewing 2 senior members of the Red Cross Volunteer Corps. And they reported that these interactions were incredibly moving, and they were able to understand a great deal of complexity about what's going on in the region. Next, please. We've adapted some project approaches to accommodate the distance environment, and a lot of teams have introduced more of a research dimension maybe than they would have if they were on site. And of course, our students, being as innovative and driven as they are, have taken upon themselves to reach out in many cases to experts from around the world. And we've had several projects that have involved experts and key informants from multiple continents, not just the US and Australia, but bring in folks from Asia and Europe as well. This project was developing a pathway for algae in a circular bioeconomy in the Gippsland region of Australia. And they were able to engage some real leaders in this emerging industry from around the world. Next, please. We have learned through this pandemic experience that our presentation events are really critical moments for disseminating our projects, of course, and elevating the impacts of our project work. They're an opportunity to bring together people, diverse people who are invested in the projects. This project had to do with transforming the bus system in the city of Melbourne, and the presentation event brought together people from city government, experts from the industry, community advocacy groups. So they end up being a really important point of coming together and exchanging ideas. Next, please. We've had a movie series that we do every week and have discussion with students, and that I think has really helped to connect the students to the place and give them that social context and cultural context to support the work that they're doing, working with their partners and working on projects in this place of Australia. Okay, next, please. And finally, I'll just end by sharing that the diversity, equity, and inclusion values that students are increasingly engaging with in their other campus activities are informing their IQP work in interesting ways and reinforcing some of the really important values that we try to transmit through the IQP, such as a commitment to decolonizing forms of engagement and the imperative that they really think critically about their voice and positionality. This project shows a team of 5, 3 WPI students and their 2 co-researchers who are both from refugee backgrounds and are now located in Melbourne. And they're together building a platform to help underemployed youth get access to resources to help their job preparedness and job readiness. So this kind of project opened my eyes to how the DEI values can help enrich the IQPs and vice versa. I think we have a lot that we can do in that intersection. Okay, thank you. I'd like to turn it over now to Adam Sears and Mitra Anand from the Makerspace.
Thanks, Stephen. Let me get this open here. All right, good morning. I'm Adam Sears, and I'm the Director of Technical Operations for the Foy's Innovation Studio. And I'm joined with my colleague, Mitra Anand, who's our Advanced Technology and Prototyping Specialist. Today, we're going to talk briefly and share some of the exciting things that the Makerspace has been a part of in this challenging year. Next slide. For those who are not familiar with the Makerspace and Prototyping Lab in Foy's, we are a hub for making at WPI. We are part of the innovation and entrepreneurship team, and our resources are available to the entire WPI community. We strive to provide an environment where people can collaborate and create exciting new things. Our facility consists of a makerspace, which is primarily a small tool makerspace with reservable workbenches, hand tools, project storage. We also have a store where you can purchase materials for your project needs. And our prototyping lab houses our more advanced equipment, which includes FDM printers, a laser cutter, a desktop water jet machine, and PCB fabrication equipment, among some other equipment. Next slide, please. So with our space being built with the intent of being a collaborative environment, we've had to make adjustments to create a safe working conditions through this pandemic. Some of the steps that we taken are shown on this slide. So our machine training was moved to be 100% online this year. Spaces and machines were moved to a reservation system to ensure the resources were there when they were needed and reduce the number of unnecessary interactions, which could hopefully reduce risk for transmission. The 3D printing process flow was modified to be completely remote, including remote design handling, design consultations, payment, and contactless pickup, sorry. We also fabricated over 350 kits, which were included in 3D printing, laser cutting parts, and they were used for academic coursework and were shipped to the students so that they didn't have to come to campus to pick them up. Next slide. The team also worked closely with many faculty members and students on academic coursework. This included supporting course projects for several departments, MQP support, and supporting research efforts across campus. We are also hosting a course called Art in the Makerspace taught by Professor Rosenstock, which has really opened some doors to new users and new uses of the space, and it's been really exciting to see how this is evolving through this exciting D-term. Next slide. I just want to give you a snapshot of what this year has looked like for us. We have 2,441 active users of our resources. At the time that we made this PowerPoint, we had printed 252 kilograms of material in about 7,746 completed print beds. That number is constantly climbing. And just the other day, we hit the milestone of 1,000 kilograms of filament printed in our lab, which is pretty exciting. The Makerspaces had 3,320 tool checkouts and 4,577 reserved project work hours and more. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Mitra Anand. Next slide.
Thanks, Adam. So even though we were able to have almost the same level, or in some cases, much higher level of space utilization and tool usage amongst our student community, I think the one major challenge that students had with such a hands-on space is to be able to engage with the Makerspace and collaborate with their teammates in order to work on projects, mainly due to the restricted like safety guidelines and other things that you're all familiar with over the past year. So Instagram as an informal platform for students was largely created this year with a focus on engaging students and improving the way in which we communicate to them, as well as keep them updated on what's going on around the space and how they can best utilize the space in a safe and effective manner. So this year we started first by featuring a lot of interesting projects that were happening that the students are doing in the space, and we pivoted on to doing some live workshops. We did workshops on how to sew your own face mask and how to get started with 3D printing, amongst others, which had a combined viewership of over 1,000 student users, most of which were undergraduate students. This year has really taught us that social media especially can help us in fostering and inspiring a very inclusive community of student innovators. And we plan to keep using this going forward to keep everyone on track with announcements and keep featuring interesting projects coming out of the space. Next slide, please. So the Makerbox Prototyping Fund was introduced in the middle of C term, but we really kicked things off in D term by enabling more students to apply for this. The Makerbox, in brief, is a prototyping fund that awards students up to $100 to work on their projects. So it's no strings attached type of funding. And we mainly introduced this as a way to encourage students to get creative, as a way to reduce the financial barrier to entry for creativity and for experimentation. And generally to kind of encourage students to get their hands dirty and try different things that are most usually outside of their usual comfort zone. So we've been having some great success with the program so far, with funds awarded to up to 23 teams so far. I think we added the 24th team recently, and we've seen some really cool and exciting projects come out of the space. I have a few pictures of some of the already completed projects, but we have projects ranging from basic 3D printing efforts all the way up to making cosplay armor. Someone's making an Iron Man helmet, like as we are speaking right now. People are making like customizable like video game controllers, and it's just very exciting to see the interesting things come out of this particular program. Next, please. So last year we kind of started our efforts to fabricate and donate over 1,000 face shields and other PPE to our local like booster community hospitals, health centers, and nursing homes. This year we followed up and we made over 300 National Institutes of Health approved designs for face shields as a way of supporting the in-person return to campus and in-person teaching activities. So we were able to make a face shield available to every single staff, faculty, and TAs who are teaching or who are back on campus in fall 2020. Just an interesting fact is we still have a few left over, so if anyone's interested, please feel free to get in touch and we can make sure we can get it out to you. Next slide, please. I'd like to end our session by talking briefly about some of the global efforts that we've been a part of for the past year. During the peak of the pandemic in Africa last year, we were able to work together on an effort to deliver lectures and workshops and other consultation-related help to over 100 faculty and other stakeholders across our partner institutions in Africa. We did some workshops on how to get started for 3D printing, getting everyone up to speed on the fundamentals, and also getting them started on the technology in general, which enabled them to print PPE and support their own local communities in their time of need. Next slide, please. This year, we followed up with the Pandemic Engineering for Africa program in D-Term, where we kind of built upon the existing workshops and training that we provided last year by focusing on more advanced topics. And we did workshops in the topics of design for additive manufacturing, as well as design for topology optimization, which enabled our faculty partners across Africa to design smartly with the intent of 3D printing and AM in general, as well as reduce their material consumption and reduce the costs associated with creating PPE and other tools that they were actively fabricating across Africa. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So what's in the works? Where do we go from here? We're focusing on efforts on continuing to expand our community. We're going to pursue additional collaborations with professors similar to the Art in the Makerspace course. We'll be looking to partner with clubs on campus to help further our offerings and resources. I know we're working with the cycling club to have tools available specifically for cycling related work. The team will be working to add additional capabilities to the facility. We have a roll and vinyl cutter that we're adding, a vacuum forming machine that's being introduced, and there's a manual injection molding press that I'm working on right now. And I'm hoping to have workshops around kind of the basics of what injection molding is and how these manufacturing processes work. We're also working to secure additional 3D printing resources in space, which should help reduce some bottlenecks that we have for the full users. And lastly, we're continuing to look beyond the walls of Boise, and we're working with pre-collegiate outreach on programs that can help continue reach out to the local community and increase our reach. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Adam Heppy.
Morning, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Adam Heppy, Professor of Military Science and the Commander of the Army ROTC program. I'm excited to take a few minutes to speak to you about leadership development in the COVID environment. As the pandemic descended upon us, the Army and ROTC, like WPI, quickly transitioned to remote everything. Classes, meetings, physical fitness, and training were all conducted remotely or over a digital platform. However, within a couple of months, the Army realized that the risk to training atrophy and its impact on unit readiness was a greater risk to the force than COVID-19 was at the time. On this slide, you'll see three pictures. First Lieutenant Mac Eberhardt, mechanical engineering, class of 19, receiving his Army aviation wings and becoming an Apache pilot. Cadet Spencer Tess, class of 21, was nationally recognized by the Federal Laboratories Consortium for his summer virtual internship work. And the final picture is cadets from WPI, UMass Amherst, URI, Providence College, and UConn boarding a Black Hawk helicopter at Joint Base Cape Cod for Operation Agile Leader this past summer. And all these pictures were taken prior to classes starting in the fall. So we were ready to go as soon as the doors open. In the military, we're trained to assess risk, implement control measures, and continue the mission. And COVID-19 has provided the perfect backdrop to teach our future leaders how to manage risk. Next slide, please. So how is Army ROTC different from other departments here? Besides our green uniforms and awesome haircuts. Our situation is different because we have over 90 cadets who are students at 9 different schools and universities. So not only did we need to adhere to state and local regulations, but also to risk mitigation measures imposed on individual campuses. Some schools were fully remote, some were hybrid, and a few were in person. And testing protocols and campus access varied greatly from school to school. But one thing that didn't change was our mission. We were still responsible for meeting our recruiting, retention, and commissioning goals And additionally, we had to figure out how to train, educate, and inspire our cadets to be technically and tactically proficient leaders despite these challenges of COVID-19. So how do we execute differently? Physical fitness, which is at the core of military service, started 100% remotely. And we slowly grew to small groups and to larger groups as we abided by state guidelines. But remotely, cadets led PT sessions over Zoom. Others submitted their workouts through fitness tracking apps like Strava. We as cadre and the cadet leadership utilize social media to inspire our cadets, through personal example. I remember at one point sending out a video of my 10-year-old son knocking out 10 pull-ups in our basement and challenging the cadets to beat him. Unfortunately, our classroom work for our underclass, the freshman and sophomore, had to remain remotely all year just because we couldn't expect them to be able to have the transportation assets to travel to a neutral site. But we offset that digital classroom with in-person physical and military training. Thanks to the gracious support of Fort Devens command team, and I'm sitting in Fort Devens right now today, our junior and senior cadets were able to be offered in-person classes. We were given a facility here with 2 large classrooms that could support in-person training with physical distancing. And we've consolidated which was our weekly military leadership labs, down to a monthly event to limit that in-contact experience. And we offset that by providing digital tactical classes in the weeks in between. So the training approach has been so successful that we will actually continue to implement that as we move forward, even out of the pandemic. Physical distancing, temperature checks, symptoms tracking, became second nature to all of our operations. And our cadets are including all of these processes in every deliberate risk assessment worksheet that they complete for every training event. In the Army, when we receive a mission, we usually dissect that order into, a series of facts, assumptions, tasks, and constraints. Facts are what we know about ourselves and about the enemy. Assumptions, are those information gaps that we need to fill to complete the plan. Tasks are things that we're assigned to do, whether those are specified or implied. And then those constraints, those are the limitations that confine our operations. Constraints can come in the form of time, location, resources, information, and sometimes even motivation. But the ability to work within or overcome those constraints in order to complete the mission really distinguishes leaders from managers. Next slide, please. So with these constraints, they offer leadership opportunities. And we've already talked about that risk management piece, but leadership is a contact sport. So how do we get back to educating and training in person? We adhered to the state guidelines for group sizes and distancing. We wore masks even during physical training, but we continued to train. We asked our cadets to solve problems through innovative ideas. When our normal winter training facility became the COVID testing site in Harrington, our cadets came to us and said, well, what about utilizing a parking garage? It offers a dry place that's well lit because we're doing PT in the early morning hours, and surprisingly nobody parks at the top of Gateway Garage. So it turned out to be a great opportunity for us. And similarly, we've used simulators to replicate rifle ranges and medical dummies to conduct first aid training. And although these training aids have always existed, so we capitalized on their ability to enable physically distanced and sanitized training environments. Next slide, please. Army Field Manual 6-22 defines leadership as the process of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and better the organization. And I'd like to celebrate a few things that our cadets have accomplished during D-term. Our Ranger Challenge team in the upper left there, led by Ian Weston, Civil Engineering, Class of 22, finished 4th of 42 teams in the Northeast, placing higher than every ROTC unit in New England and improving 22 places from our last competition, all while training in this COVID environment. On the top right there, our ROTC program was the only ROTC program in the country to train and qualify with live hand grenades this year. Certainly a daunting task, but one with, again, the risk assessment piece. COVID is just, one of the many risks to conducting a training event like this. And finally, and most significantly, we've completed a year's worth of in-person educating and training without a single cadet-to-cadet COVID transmission. In my mind, that might be a little bit of luck, but it certainly is a whole lot of leadership and a whole lot of discipline. So thanks, and we look forward to having our in-person commissioning ceremony in a few weeks. That is a huge win for the cadets, and I really appreciate WPI's support from the leadership. So I'll be followed by Ed Gonzalez with listening and learning from all of our stakeholders. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Pleasure to be with everyone here today. And I want to echo your experience with Strava. I'm a big Strava user and find it has great utility. Next slide, please. So I can't help but use my engineering undergrad from WPI and apply it to the business programs here at school. And here's an example of that. What you see here is whether you're designing a disk read channel or a radar system, or in our case, a class, the same modules and context applies. You've got a sender, which in this case is an instructor, and a receiver, which is a student. You have information that you have to encode. It has to go through a channel. It's got to be decoded on the other end. And unfortunately, there's this thing called noise. And noise presents itself in many, many forms. And there's a concept in electrical engineering known as signal to noise ratio. So as an instructor, you're trying to push a lot of signal to that receiver, and you have this noise that gets injected. And as I mentioned, it takes many, many forms. And if that noise signal starts to approach the level of the information that you're trying to transmit, it gets much more challenging to get that signal through. So in a perfect world, you want very high signal to noise ratio. So I took this concept and decided to see if I could minimize the noise as much as possible. And I wanted to share a few things that I was able to do, at least in my classes, that perhaps have some utility for you. Next slide. So one of the things you want to do is lower informational barriers. And although it's a lot more work on an instructor, I find that people and students learn in many different ways, and they have favored communication channels. So you have to take advantage of those, even though it's much more management. So what you see here is I actually give students my cell phone number, and believe it or not, many of them, and if you have young children, you'll understand that sometimes you can have a very long conversation via text that maybe you wouldn't be able to have in person, so to speak. So I offer that, and some students actually take advantage of it, and it ends up being a pretty efficient way to get business done. Sometimes it has to be email, and many students actually prefer to work in the Canvas environment for email. Yeah, 3 sources of data that you have to manage, but it ends up being more efficient and helps lower the ability or make it easier to communicate information. Next slide. One of the things that I found has been a great tool is there's an application known as Poll Everywhere. And you can use this as a way to sort of real time in class. And what's interesting about a lot of our classes being hybrid, some students in class, some students virtual, they all have phones. They take the phones out, and you can do a spot check to see what's going on. So in the middle of this particular D term in this class, I had a set of questions prepared. You get feedback that you share with students real time, and it ends up being a really effective way of understanding how you're doing and pivoting if you have to. Next slide. The devil is in the details. This is something I picked up from the instructional information people. Caitlin and her team been really wonderful in supporting and building classes online. And one of the things that students like to know when they get into things is what's the details, so they can plan their life. And putting as much detail as you can in the course, in Canvas, in assignments, and as much information there as possible helps lower their anxiety, helps things run a bit smoother. And again, a little bit of something that contributes with minimizing that noise. Next slide. Even though many of the classes needed to be asynchronous, I found that adding some synchronicity into the asynchronous world ends up being pretty effective. So this particular graduate class here was completely asynchronous, but I offered on a fairly regular basis over the 14 weeks. Every other week, we would have an optional synchronous class. And I'd always bring in former students. So the featured person there is a former student of mine. She's a VP at a company called Better Cloud that is basically SaaS for SaaS. And she came in and spent an hour with the students, and we had more than 3/4 of the students attend an optional session. It helped to sort of reset students and confirm and validate a lot of the learning that we were doing. And it was completely optional, but I think students really, again, appreciated that. It's also an opportunity for students to ask questions along the way. Again, something else to minimize that noise level. Next slide. One thing I think in my talk talked about stakeholders. I mentioned that. I think it's really important to take advantage of everybody to help contribute to this. So obviously the current students there need to be engaged and involved. It's important to get industry as part of it, to make them aware of what WPI can do, and then make the students aware of what industry is and what is looking forward for them. Obviously having alums involved, taking colleagues and getting them engaged in the class, making it as proactive as you can and experiential, and then having former students come in. I think it's rare when I ask a former student or a colleague or someone in industry through my non-academic career to help that they don't help. And I think all of these things, again, help create a very high signal to noise ratio. And those are tools that I've been able to use over the past year to great effect. And I think that wraps it up. I appreciate the opportunity, and on to the next presenter.
Thanks, Ed. I'm Joe Stabile, and this is my D-term retrospective on a challenge. Next slide, please. So I usually teach product design classes. In D-term, though, I teach a classic course, and it is called Stress Analysis. And I thought, oh, wow, that's very apropos to looking back at this year, stress analysis. It has been a stressful year, but we're dealing with it. I'm trying to deal with that by amping up my PowerPoint equation editor this term to make a classic course a little bit more informative, working even harder to keep students engaged. My philosophy comes from my industry experience. It's called Kaizen, continuous improvement. I treat the student as the customer, and I try and put myself in their shoes. And honestly, I find that a constant challenge to keep them engaged. I never think that I'm doing enough. So this term, and even last year in the virtual term, in D-term, I've added high-end tools for them to experience. And I think they like it. Next slide, please. Comparing to C-term, in C-term, as I said, I teach mostly design classes. C-term was challenging in another way. I was asked to teach 2 product design classes, one an intro class and one an advanced design class. Luckily, both classes had company sponsors. And thankfully, we have FOISE. Spent a lot of time visiting student teams in FOISE. If it wasn't for FOISE, C-term would have been not very good. But D-term may not be as physically challenging, but it's mentally challenging to keep the focus on a classic course and keep everybody engaged. Next slide, please. I think about a year ago, an email came out on WPI about existentialism. And as an engineer, it kind of blew by me, but I think I now know what existential is. When I come back in from my morning workout in the garage, I greet my wife with, "Good morning, how is my isolation buddy?" And she just looks at me and groans. I met one of my students in FOISE, whom I've had for 3+ previous online classes. I had him first in last D term, and then I had him in A and then B terms. And he mentioned to me, wow, you're a lot taller than I thought. In C term and product design classes, we hold weekly online sprint reviews where student teams get to say what's going right and what needs improvement. And they had found it very challenging to keep that communication stream going even in the virtual environment. And I myself, I start the day making a mental list of what needs improvement. So existential. Next slide, please. My new mental to-do list. I rarely go a day without learning something from my students, and I really mean this. So this is my 6th year at WPI, and I retired from industry back in 2015, and I really haven't retired mentally. Rarely does a day go by that I don't learn something from my students. I love the MQPs and the development opportunity for new product ideas it provides me. And I feel that if nothing else, I want to learn more about gaming, as I think it can be used a lot in my presentations to enhance concepts. So I thought it was very interesting that we're amping up our gaming environment here at WPI. So look out, Java, here I come. Thank you very much. And I'd like to hand off to Beth Wilson. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to share with you how my students rock the discussion board. So next. So I learned the hard way that remote teaching is not the same thing as online learning. And when I transitioned discussion boards to an online environment, quite frankly, I found it to be underwhelming because even though I had the same prompt that I was putting forward, the students were I don't know, they had a check the box mentality. Somewhere along the line, they had learned that more was better. So I ended up with these rambling posts, and I had, it was a week-long assignment, and I had 6 days of silence and then 1 day of a Tower of Babel right at the deadline. So it just felt really tedious, and it didn't feel like it was a learning environment. So I became a frequent visitor at Caitlin Keller's office, asking the question, how can we make the discussion boards more effective for online learning? Okay, so next. I attended the Faculty Institute for Online Teaching, that's now the Online Pedagogy Workshop, and that's where I learned how to make the discussion board work in an online environment. The first was my responsibility to create a prompt that was going to, it would be really hard for the students not to make connections to material and hard for them not to display critical thinking. And I created a rubric that rewarded early engagement, critical thinking, and meaningful replies. But the magic came in this fictional discussion board that Caitlin and I created so that the students would grade a discussion board with 5 students the first week so that they could see what a model post looked like. They could learn that quantity was not the same as quality, and I could reinforce that plagiarism was not acceptable. And Caitlin and I presented this at Online Learning Consortium. So go to the next slide. We'll see that it was a fictional discussion board with 5 students. So these 5 students actually are officially in the WPI students. We have Donald Duck and Luke Skywalker, and it makes for an interesting discussion board. Each class that I run now, I pick a different fictional student to be the model student, to have one that does plagiarism, one that has a very long and rambling post, one that has a short post that has connections, has critical thinking, but you have to kind of stand on your head to see it. And then somebody that misses part of the assignment. And I've done this now with over 100 students, and all of them get the model student. So that's good. Some of them get the plagiarism. Some of them either miss it despite all of my hints, or they just take points off for not citing properly. So I'm able to calibrate that. They tend to reward the long post and punish the short post, and then sometimes they miss the enabler point I'm doing to encourage early engagement. But it's interesting the consistent results with these students and getting them to understand what I'm looking for in the discussion board. Next. So what has been happening is that when they start to engage in the discussion boards themselves in week 2, the discussion boards are excellent. They're making connections to the material. They have quality interaction, and I'm seeing critical thinking. So I've been very pleased with it. Go to the next slide and you see what we did last fall. I was teaching decision-making and risk management. And so what I did was I created a discussion board thread. Each week we had a discussion board, and they all related to the Massachusetts reopening plan. So the students picked one of the 20 business sectors, and they applied the content each week to real decisions that would have to be made in that sector and real risks that needed to be assessed. So the students picked one business, and it made it very interesting because there was a lot of variety in the discussion board. Next. So for the decision-making concepts, they applied the content of the week to the sector they had picked. For the risk, we applied that to a school, and then I had a general one at the end. Next. I'll give you a couple of examples of the prompts. So in week 2, this was about decision making, and I asked them to describe the decision context for their sector. So they had to describe the values and objectives of the business and what decisions needed to be made. Week 5 was about risk. So I asked them to make a risk statement using the format I taught them, to characterize it with the content from the class, and to put together a potential mitigation plan. And they could pick a school. It could be a school their kids went to. That could be WPI. It could be some generic college, some generic high school, whatever they wanted to do. So we had a lot of variety in the discussion board. And the most interesting week was week 7, when the course content was about risk attitude and cognitive bias. And they were asked to identify some controversial aspect of the pandemic and connect it to the risk attitudes and the decision paradox that we were talking about. So the discussion boards were excellent. Next. But you don't have to take my word for it. I got excellent feedback from the students that they enjoyed the discussion boards, and they enjoyed it so much they actually put it in the course and survey comments. So I had some feedback that was positive about applying this to a real problem and the way that we were doing the discussion board. Next. So the thing I found really helpful was having variety in the discussion board questions and wording it so that they can make connections to the content and apply the concepts and show critical thinking to real world problems. And then by setting the expectations with the fictional discussion board, that was a little fun having these characters talk about things in the first week. We really saw some quality posts with meaningful replies, and the discussion board ended up being in my favorite part of the class. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to somebody that I think has an excellent first name, Beth Eddy.
Thank you so much. Why I chose this title for what I wanted to talk about, what binds us together and pulls us apart. At the time, I was thinking about a band concert that we had recently online, and I was referencing a student's meditations on the word apart and a part and being apart. Robbie, I'll give credit to Robbie Olenek on that. It's something I have riffed upon in some of my writings as well. And it seemed apt for our context in D-term and all year really. Being apart has been the dominant factor of D-term for more than a year now, or going on for more than a year. Next slide. I teach in the humanities. And so it's very different what has worked well for me and what has not worked so well. What has worked well for me in the humanities are the inquiry seminars. And I have some ideas as to why. I think in inquiry seminars, students meet together and discuss what they're working on, but they actually are responsible as individuals for their own personal research. And I think the majority of students did better than they normally do with this, with an online approach. I think I asked them why, and they said there weren't as many social interruptions, so they could think more about what they were researching and writing about. But I need to say what worked really badly, not this D term, but the first D term online. I had a very large bioethics class with 50 students, and some of them were in China. And so I had to take an asynchronous approach to that class. And I think we all left a little unsatisfied with that. I know I did, and the feedback from the students seemed to like really miss the personal contact. Even though I had tried to change the readings so that they would be not typical philosophical bioethics that we would normally read, but to be more narrative based, to be more storytelling. And I think that helped some, but ultimately was unsatisfactory, unsatisfying to me. Talked a little bit with Tanya Domingo about her classes, and she was enthusiastic about it. And she inspired me to go buy a whiteboard and to continue teaching pretty much as I have in the past, which I did. And I think the lecturing went pretty well. The discussions, not so much exactly. And unfortunately, that's the most important part of what we do in the humanities. I'm a teacher who tries to, my lectures are really off script and freestyle. I have a script, but I try not to resort to it if I don't have to. Try to roam the classroom. I encourage students to interrupt me, students to talk with each other. And it's kind of a conversation that goes on in little boxes. That just did not happen. I do find that the smaller the class I've had, the better those kinds of discussions have worked online. But that roaming style, that sort of theatricality of bringing everybody into the conversation and us talking all together is how I teach best. And it's how I best reached my aims. And it was not really something that I could pull off well in D term or in most of the online terms. Next slide. Some of you may know, and I guess most of you know now that Laura talked about it, that this is going to be my last year here at WPI. And Wooly asked me to say a bit about my time here at WPI with my talk today. And I have to say that I leave with very, very mixed emotions. Mike and Ingrid, you may be the only two people, if you're on, who recognize the picture here. It's a picture of a Pohotukawa flower, which is a New Zealand Christmas tree flower. It was taken on the day I arrived in New Zealand for IQP projects, terribly jet lagged and totally exhausted. And yet this picture was a really nice one I thought I took, and one that I can use to talk about exhaustion a little bit. This has been an exhausting year, I must say so. And I will also say that as a humanities scholar and somebody who didn't go online until my late 30s, I've been pushed way past my tech capabilities with my class, so I've tried to keep up with them. Inspired by my colleague John Semamatsu and also from some other things I was reading, I began rereading the book The Plague by Albert Camus. There's an existentialist for you. Reading it with a couple of my students who are working on minor capstone projects. And in reading that book, particularly in the last week, I've been thinking about an idea that springs from the book, which is that exhaustion plus mistrust, both of which tend to be present in plague situations, is a pretty potent and a pretty dangerous mixture. And it has the capacity for pulling us apart every bit as much as the contagion of the COVID-19 virus separates us physically. So the word of caution here is, as I depart, is that I don't think everything humanly valuable can be measured in dollar signs. I know that trust cannot be measured in dollar signs. And in the short term, it's so tempting to exploit and capitalize, if you will, on a trust and make use of it. But in the long term, it's not going to work out so well. I think we can look around us and see some of that going on in the world. The lack of it ultimately is going to cost us money, and that money is going to be probably the least of what it costs us in terms of value. But that's enough about what pulls us apart. I don't want to say more about that. I did want to mention it, but I want to talk about what binds us together as well. And when I reflect back over this last year online about what has bound me to all of my coworkers at WPI, I think of things like music. I think of the kindnesses, the extraordinary kindnesses that have been rendered to me by various people. I think of the experience of solidarity, which is something I have seen grow in the last few months and the last year, really. And I've seen the incredible courage of staff and junior faculty here, the kind of courage that's a hard thing to develop and build on. I've also just seen the playing keep on keeping on kind of virtues, the virtue of perseverance. And I think that's one thing that has been really important in keeping us together. Next slide, please. And most importantly, I think what binds us together, all of us at WPI, are our students. They really do bind us together. And for me, project work that I've done at WPI has allowed me to get to know my students much better. It's allowed, first of all, it's allowed me to have 14 weeks with them at least, if I haven't had them in other classes, and instead of the normal 7. And that's been dear to me. It's been a treasure that I keep with me. And those individual students and getting to know them, that's what drives my teaching. Project-based learning also speaks to me philosophically. I'm a pragmatist. One of my heroes, John Dewey, big in pragmatism, both in pragmatism and education, believed and advocated in teaching by doing. Next slide. I knew from the day that I interviewed at WPI back in 2007 that I wanted to do project-based learning. And it has given me my greatest successes and my greatest joys in working here. WPI has some very good things going for it, and project-based learning, in my humble opinion, is its crown jewel to be treasured, to be preserved. Next slide. Along with some students that have become very dear to me, I'll miss some very good friendships I've made here with colleagues and with coworkers. And hopefully we'll stay in touch. I don't really plan to be a stranger to campus. And with that, I'll hand off to Provost Wole Soballejo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth, for those really insightful and moving words. I have to say it's been a special pleasure getting to know you, and also getting to appreciate just all the different dimensions in which you've kind of contributed to WPI. And thanks for crystallizing out a few things for us to take from this year. You know, it has been a tiring year, but actually many of those things that stress us are only part of what we have faced, right? The other parts are the things that pull us together, especially our students and our sense of community, our values. And those are the things that truly make WPI a special place and help us to overcome the challenges. So thanks for all that you do, and thanks for all that you've done. And we hope that you'll continue to come back and be with us even as you retire. But for me, today has been really special as I kind of reflect on what we have done as an institution in the past year. And I have to say, just listening to all those that have presented today was just a great example of what really makes WPI special, right? Each person that spoke converted what could have been a major challenge to an opportunity. And if you look at the examples from Donna Harmon, discussions on phys ed, right? You would think that in the year of the pandemic, you know, what can you do? But 90% of our courses are now back in person, not a single transmission. And then before that, the online ways of providing knowledge, education to our students in ways that serve them for life were explored. And for Steve McCauley, teaching from Melbourne, finding new ways of engaging the students and all the stakeholders to kind of build mindsets and values. Or Anand Mitra and Adam Sears, and the work they've done to have impact, not just in Worcester, but impact all across the world. And I could tell you that their students in Africa have gone on to produce masks and solutions that are serving communities across many African countries in ways that you cannot imagine. And this year, they're taking those to even greater heights. And then what about Adam Heppy, right? If you really look at what we've done in military science, I think what we find is we shape the students, not just in the classroom, but we shape them through programs like ROTC that shape the characters of people in ways that really mold future leaders. And I really want to appreciate Adam and the team for the work that they continue to do to build leaders who can turn constraints into examples of how you deal with real challenging situations in the real world. And then Joe, talking about stress analysis, gave me fun memories of my early days as a mechanical engineering undergrad, right? But really finding ways of making these kind of subjects come alive again in ways that excite the students, and treating the students with respect, with concepts such as Kaizen, for me was just a great example of the kinds of philosophical approaches that truly connect to students in ways that really inspire them and help them better to connect to us. Then rocking the discussion board with Beth Wilson, I thought was just a great example of active learning and how you get great outcomes from learning. And it was obvious to me that Beth is not just happy to get in front of the students, she's always really thinking about how do you get the desired responses in ways that are really epitomized by our best teachers. And really as we've gone through this, and I really appreciate all of you, I want to say that what we celebrate today is what really makes WPI a great place to learn. And it's great professors and great students, and the mutual respect of each other and understanding in ways that have enabled us to come through this pandemic here. So right from the very beginning, from the light board of Dustin Heilman to the virtual labs of Andy Texera and Rob Dempsey, to the ways of teaching music of Doug Weeks, or the ways of teaching theater of Kate Moncrief, or whether it's Rob Sani or Ed Gonzalez talking about ways of making business exciting, or it's Donna and Adam talking about PE and ROTC. This is truly a wonderful place to learn. And I really want to celebrate everybody that's made this past COVID year happen, right? At the beginning, we were worried, but within 2 weeks, all of us were online. That's major agility that was shown and resilience. And as we've navigated our way through the pandemic, it's really been the spirit of community. It's really been the commitment to our students that has enabled us to get this far. And I truly hope that as we move forward into the next few weeks, please continue to be understanding of each other. Please, of course, keep our focus on our students and really on our community. And I thank all of you. This whole program would not have been possible without people like Rachel Roy and doing a lot of the heavy lifting behind the scenes. Rachel and folks like Carrie helping her in the background. We thank you. To our community that stayed with us, we thank you and we really celebrate you. And I personally look forward to celebrating all of you when we're back in campus in the fall. And so with that, I'd like to bring this to a close unless there are some questions that people would like to pose. Are there any questions?
Currently no questions in the Q&A. If anyone has a question, please feel free to post that.
Okay, I don't see any. Thanks everyone. Please stay safe and we'll see you all soon.